Okay, now it's time to build an adaptive component and apply it. The way we do that in Dynamo is we're taking the left side and the right side, combining them into a list. And that's a list of, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So it's a list of lists. And then we use, up here I've created a Boolean switch. All this is by saying true or false, it either connects these things to this or not. And that was just giving me a chance in development for control. But if you forget this, really the family type plugs into here, the points plugs into here, and it applies an adaptive component to our points that we've determined. And in this case you don't see it, but there's a family type that we select, and that's the construction of our 3-point adaptive component. So let's go ahead and look at actually building the adaptive component. So I'm going to go out to Revit. I'll hide Dynamo. And we're going to open up a new, a new family element, which will be a generic adaptive component. And I'll start it off pretty simple. First of all, I'm going to save it with a name. I'll call it adapt1. Any ideas? We need some adaptive points. So let's go first and set a reference line and then put in some reference points on this. And we're going to move these. Take these 3 points and make them adaptive. And we'll look at it from the front elevation, or excuse me, well, we can look at it from the front elevation. That's fine. So that one's sticking out like our arm would be. I'll move this one over. I'll move this one over and tie this to the grade. So this is our base, our midspan, our roof, our height of our building, and this is just the reach of the adaptive arm, the lofted roof. We'll go back to a 3D view of this. What we'd like to do now is connect this with a reference line, a couple of reference lines. And that's on chain command and 3D snapping, so they all come together. And let's go ahead and just make a simple form on it. So I'll put a point on this reference line, grab our circle tool, set our reference plane for this, put a small circle on here, that'll be a 12-inch diameter something. We'll select our reference lines, create a form. And now what we want to do is load that into the project. And we don't really need to load it into the actual scene. It just needs to be where Dynamo can find it, because now if we go out to Dynamo, let's go back to our definition, because we're going to need a couple of things. We're going to need adaptive components by points and family types. Let's see what comes up. Adaptive components by comes up, and it's probably there somewhere on the screen. There it is. I'll put it over here, and then family. Family types. Not sure I got the right. I don't. Let me check what the definition of that is. Family types. Well, it's probably the one I wanted. And if we look in the drop down, we should have adapt. There's our component. We're going to plug that into family type. we're going to go ahead now and grab our at least one set of our points and plug it into here. And we don't get an appearance in Dynamo, but we should get appearance in Revit. Okay, so there we are. We have our first placement of our adaptive components. And if I was to grab Dynamo and kind of shrink it down a little bit, see if I can grab it somewhere, taking over the whole screen. We can slide over here and we can change the number of ribs. Got 10, let's change it to 15. And that should automatically run and update that, and it is. And now we have 15 ribs. So now this is fully functional about our all the things we wanted. Let's say we'll make the we want these two. Well, let's go ahead now and create the symmetry that we want, or the other set of elements. So we need one of those list creates. So I'm going to grab that and just copy it. And actually I might take this off of automatic running, because we're plugging in adaptive components now. And so in the list create, I'm going to pull, the first one is the points from the one list, and we have the list from the other one. And we can actually get rid of this now. So I'll just go ahead and delete this. Well, I'll leave it here because it gives us some of a visualization on the Dynamo side. And let's plug this into here. I'll shrink this down. Oops, it grew back up again. And let's hit run. And we should go ahead and get the other ones on the other side. So now our next objective here would be to come up with some kind of a shape or concept in this adaptive component that you might find more attractive than the one that's done here. And we obviously have a lot of controls over the way we embellish this form. So let me go ahead and actually just show you one that I've already created. Let me go back to and load in a, I'm gonna blow this back up and I'll put this away, and I'll go into manage, is it, to load in. Well, maybe I'll just go out to the desktop and find it. So I have this adaptive point that I've already built. So I'll kind of describe what this element is, and invite you to, you can either do something similar to this, and I might before long actually embellish this a little better, but the idea is that this is a piece of tapered wood. I've given it a definition of wood oak, which is in the Revit. I start with a box of one size and taper to another one. I've defined a point on that reference line on both ends with two different size extrusions. This extrusion is on a NURBS curve where I've got a random curve point. It's not a good idea to have this kind of floating reference point because it isn't determined by any geometry, but it worked out pretty good for this example. And then I have a reference point between this point here and this point down here. And I've extruded out a piece, what might be like a metal tension rod, just created an element up here. I'm also noticing that I have 1, 3, and 2. And if we were to look back, I don't think we're in the same configuration with the numbering. So this one is actually 1. Well, excuse me, I've got to go the other way around it. I've got to label it the same way as this is. So we have 1, 2, and 3. So let's go ahead back to this other one and see if I can renumber that so that if we try to, Let me save this with another name. And we'll call this one Adapt 2, which is just a version of it, the Adaptive Panel 3 there. If I can figure out how to get in here. Oops. And so this point needed to be 1. Now let's see what that does for renumbering. And this one needs to be 2. And hopefully that one's 3. I think that matches now. So that was 1, 2, 3. So we have an identical, I don't know why this one isn't extruded out again. Maybe I hit undo by accident. Okay, so let's go over back to this one that we just have modified. And I'm going to load that one into the project also. The project video, I've called it. And once again, we don't actually want to place it. What we really want to do is just grab Dynamo, and zoom in here for the family types, and go to the drop down and just reselect that. And I'll go ahead and run that. And that should update in a minute. And there we go. And we can actually, let's just give it some rendering. Just for fun. Okay, so that's so we have these all of the lines that are showing right now. We can get rid of the blue lines that are distracting. We can get rid of those because by going into Dynamo, as you might know already, and then just start taking the previews off of all of the elements that you see. So if you right-click on any of these, we can turn the previews off. And that's a little bit tedious. You have to go through all of those. But I wanted to keep this relatively concise as far as the discussion goes for this. So I want to, I'm going to go ahead now and, well, one other element we could look at, and that's creating a rooftop for that. So that's taking these two lines and creating them into a NURB form. Let's just do that really quickly. So it's the idea of the roof form. So we're going to take those exact two NURBS curves, which if I zoom out here, and we're going to surface by loft. And let me just zoom out so I can show you what curves we're actually grabbing. So we're grabbing the NURBS curves very early on from the top and bottom into a list create, and then lofting them as a surface to create, well, a form. And let's just go into Dynamo and look for surface by loft. I think it was cross sections though, wasn't it? Well, it's taking cross sections. And so we now need a list create. But we don't want the inputs that I have currently here. We want to grab these NURB lines. Those are the curves. And plug those into here. And we can run that again. And actually we should see right in, oops, did I use the wrong definition? All right, so I grabbed the two NURB curves, combine them, and it's surface by loft. Well, we're putting in a NURBS curve there. Did I grab the wrong thing up here? I guess I did, yep. Let's rerun that. And there we have a roof surface over the whole thing. And if we close this down, you'll see we generated a form the same way on this. So I think that's a good introduction to generating some nice, interesting geometry using adaptive points in Dynamo. We have a lot of flexibility in our controls. So next I'll look at the idea of putting it together for a presentation sheet.